now introduce our three guest speakers. So the chairs will go up, and if I could invite Sister Maureen to first come up and join on stage. And Sister Maureen, we're really pleased for her to be with us, is the Program Director for Brahma Kumaris UK and the representative of Brahma Kumaris at the United Nations in Vienna. And for over 40 years, Sister Maureen has endeavored to make spirituality accessible to people at all levels of society, including in healthcare, education, young people, women's issues, men's issues. And also Sister Maureen's been very involved in interfaith dialogue. And there's many, many other gifts that Sister Maureen has, both in the international environmental with COP, and also how to bring that connection with biodiversity. So what is our responsibility as human beings in relation to the planet? And so thank you so much for joining us. And I'd like to invite Sister Ella, if you would like to come and join us up on stage. And Sister Ella is a compassion consultant, writer, and conscious activist, and is the recipient of Daddy Janki, who was the head of our whole world Brahma Kumaris, and there was a whole group of women of spirit back in 2016, and Ella was invited to be one of these women. And she's the trustee, one of the trustees of the Desmond Tutu Foundation in UK, a founder of Peace in the City, and a facilitator for empowerment, cultivating cultures of peace, and an advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and mental health. So we have some very powerful speakers. And third, that we'd like to invite up Brother Matthew. And Brother Matthew is also a very experienced yogi and has been many years studying Raja Yoga meditation and teaches students and gives public talks. And he comes also with a scientific hat. And the more that I talk with Matthew, the more I realize that that scientific mind, when in harmony with deep spiritual understanding, is another wonderful gift to give to the world. And he was a graduate in genetics, so I'm sure that continues in one form or another. And so interesting. So we'll be hearing from three very diverse, and yet can you see the running threads of connection between these three amazing people? And remember, every one of you is amazing as well. Every soul on the planet in a body is amazing. And what else? And is head of business, so many different hats. So with no more ado, I'm going to invite Matthew to lead off with the dialogue between the three of you, and let us go deep. So be open to a wonderful inner journey, and then how we connect. And there'll be an opportunity for some questions at the end online. Please use the chat, and your questions will be read out as well, the amount that we can facilitate. Thank you so much.
Hello, hi, warm welcome again. Thank you, Masana, for that. I'm not going to try and rap. I'll leave that to the expert. Well, thanks. Lovely to be with Sister Maureen and Ella today. And I'm moderating, as Masana said, so I'm delighted to be playing that role. Is everybody okay? Yes. Good. Because I think the topic's quite... You could think it was quite intense, the sort of topics, the sort of subjects we're dealing with today. I know in the blurb it talked about unresolved pain, heartache, generational emotional suffering, ancestral suffering, all these sort of things. So I wanted to start really by saying, in the practice of Raja Yoga meditation that we study and practice here, and this is a really key thing, is that we learn that the soul before it starts its human journey is completely pure and without any suffering, without any heartache, without any upheaval. And it's really important, I think, to identify with that original goodness that we all have inside of us. And it's only when we start to move away from the connection with who we really are that the suffering starts. So it's really a healing journey. But of course, to embark on that healing journey, we need to discuss these topics and honestly look at, the difficulties, the obstacles that we face. But to start with a couple of questions that connect us more with the empowering truth of our original goodness. I wanted to start with these uplifting questions before we delve into some of the trickier topics. And one of the questions had, maybe Sister Maureen can start with you, is since embarking on the spiritual journey, could you share one magical realization that you've had? And magical in the sense that it's made a difference to your quality of life in a practical way.
Thank you. Hello? 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 Okay, that's it. Okay, so hello to everyone online, and it's nice to be here and to be with all of you. Many magical moments really, but there was one I was thinking of that was quite transformative. And I think a lot of this whole subject is to do with regaining one's own self-respect and dignity, regaining it. There was somebody who was really not very nice to me. I don't know why, really. Hadn't done anything to this person, but somehow, these things happen. Somebody just doesn't vibe with you, and it caused me, I was very hurt about it. And then one day I looked at this person, she was a little bit distant from me, and I thought, what do I want from you? What can you give me? And I realized nothing. And it was like a very freeing moment, because at that moment I saw that I was like begging for her love or respect or recognition, and of course it wasn't forthcoming. And when I thought, well, actually you can't give me anything, it's like I got back my dignity, and it was quite a special moment actually. So we became very good friends later on actually, which was also nice. But it was that switch, from taking to coming back to saying, well, I'm whole within myself.
Thank you for that. Interesting. It sounds like it allowed the relationship to flourish between the two of you as well, which is an interesting follow-on. And for you, Ella, do you have a magical moment you'd like to share?
Many. Here's one now. So are we good? Yeah, so many magical moments, I think. And for me, my definition of magic can be quite broad. And so when I think of magic, I often believe within myself that it's a shift in perception. And okay, I think we're good now. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, so I've got quite a broad definition of magic, and a very specific definition as well. The broad definition is that it's a shift in perception. And for me, that's sometimes where the magic and the miracles happen in that moment, and it literally can just take a moment. And so the specific one relates to a situation at work where I suppose you could say I met my nemesis, if you like. There was a bit of a north-south divide, and we just seemed to rub each other up the wrong way. However, in my naivety, I thought, well, we're all supposed to get along, aren't we? And I thought I'll broach this subject of well, what's happening here? And if we can bring some love, where's the love? Bring some love into the situation. And so I invited this person off to the park in lunchtime and brokered this conversation, which I thought went really, really well. Sadly, for them it didn't, and the relationship wasn't resolved. However, this broader definition of magic was still at play in this specific situation, because I was able to understand a little bit more about myself and what I learned, and the lesson was that I can only change my perception. I can't change someone else's perception, and for me that was the magic. So I believe there is still a conversation about people that live north of Watford. So yeah.
Thank you. And maybe you've already answered the next question, but it was maybe you have another example, reflecting on a challenging period that because of your spiritual practice that you've been able to navigate, and maybe just sharing briefly what you, looking back now, what you value about that challenging period. Maybe at the time you couldn't see it, but afterwards it's given you something.
Yeah, I think perhaps using a different example when it comes to a challenging period in my own spiritual journey has that I think that the idea is in this present moment that I'm not a stranger to grief. And one of the things that came up, I know we'll go into collective grief a little bit later on, but I think for me it was the death of my father, and that completely shattered my world. It shattered my belief in God, in humanity, in goodness, in justice, because none of it made any sense at all. And it was through continuing my spiritual journey that I did find some peace. The religion of my childhood was Christianity, and I questioned a lot, almost to the point my mother thought she was going to have a vicar for a son-in-law. Anyway, that didn't happen. And so here I am, learning the gifts of that bereavement, and learning how to live with grief and be in times of upheaval, and trusting the journey, the spiritual journey.
Right, thank you for sharing that very personal story. Appreciate that. And for you, Maureen, a challenging time that you're looking back on, you know, can see the value.
Well, a number of things, of course, and but I think I look back to that whole lockdown period, and some people say, oh, we had time to go for walks, or well, not go for walks, but only within the restriction. Or we had time to do this and this. It wasn't like that for me at all, and there were just a few of us between these two big houses, and we went online, and there was just a huge amount happening all the time. But what was, and I didn't find it easy, but what was very interesting was that, when I look back, it helped me to trust my intuition and my relationship with God a lot more, because the people that I normally consult about things, a group of us, we were talking things through, but there were others who were not so accessible, and you just had to go with it, and it really, I learnt a lot about myself through that time and what's possible with faith. So that was a big learning that time. Right. As I say, I'd rather have learnt it another way.
Yes. Yeah. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger, as they say. But yeah, sometimes it's pretty close to the bone. Yeah. And thank you both for sharing those experiences. And just to dive a bit more into some of the phrases that came up in the blurb for the program, in the description of the program. some quite, when I first read the phrases, it was, well, okay. One of them was ancestral suffering. Another one was emotional scars that ripple through generations, and also intergenerational heart wounds. They're quite strong. They're quite strong phrases, aren't they? And I had to do a bit of studying myself to really understand the nuances. And my understanding is that ancestral is sort of the core of perhaps the historical context for the development of suffering, something that goes back a very long time. And maybe emotional scars are more the psychological impact, and intergenerational heart wounds maybe more the relational effect it has within families and connections. But I'm interested in your take on it, but I thought we could start with the generational emotional scars, and just saying that, I mean, we're all experiencing suffering to one degree or another these days, right? On a personal and, interestingly, on a collective level as well. In some ways, you mentioned the pandemic, there's this sort of strength that can come from shared suffering, which is an interesting one. I think we all experienced some of that, which was maybe new to some of us at the time, but some feeling of togetherness when a situation comes that affects a large number of people. But looking at also on a personal level, there's this question of the past and the present, and how much do you think, or do you feel that the emotional scars from the past are affecting our present experience as well? How much is it maybe current things that are happening versus the loading that's happened because of what we've experienced in the past? And some of that may be that we don't even remember, maybe from childhood or before, that's having an impact on us on a very deep level. I don't know if you wanted to share, maybe Sister Maureen, if I could. Lots of things coming up again. Or?
What a easy question, right? No, I think actually ancestral pain and emotional scars and heart wounds, I think they're all connected. Actually, all part of the same kind of experience that's happening for humanity at the moment. And there's a lot of healing that is needed. And I think the past has a huge impact, more than we realise. And it took me a long time to realise it, actually. The experiences that my mother had as a refugee, the experiences that my grandparents and great-grandparents had as refugees. My mother, then also her parents, and I'd heard the stories, well, at least from my mother's side, my father's side, but I just thought they were stories, and I didn't really think they had an impact on me. But it was much later on that I realised that they have had an impact on me, because you absorb things, whatever has happened one or two generations before, maybe more. Those residual feelings tend to be transmitted on. And I'm from Jewish background, actually, so you can imagine there's a lot of things that would have happened in the past, and one from Eastern Europe. I always thought that, one thing I thought, if I'm a spiritual person, I'm a meditator, I'm studying all these things, then, I'm free from the past. And then bit by bit I realised it's not that simple. And I was like denying something. And when I was able to embrace it, I was able to let it go. which is the amazing thing. So if you just try to deny things, you're not able to let them go. But if you understand, the impact on you, then you have a chance of transformation and letting go. And that's very important. And I think that those emotional scars and that trauma is really driving so much that's happening in the world. So much. And so this level of deeper understanding, is very, very much needed, I feel.
And for you, Ella, would you like to talk a little bit about this generational emotional scarring, or even ancestral suffering, whichever you'd like to maybe touch upon, or both?
Well, interestingly, as Sister Maureen was speaking, it came to my mind the quote by Dr. Martin Luther King that all of life is interrelated, and of course the past meets the future is in the present at this time, as we're all sitting here perhaps remembering generational issues that have been in our families, in our lineage, either culturally or religiously. And I think as I'm thinking of this, it does bring up a lot of emotion. And I mean, you probably know more about this than I do, being a geneticist, I think Masana mentioned. And so one of the things on my spiritual journey is that I have taken quite a deep dive into epigenetics and what can happen beyond who we think we are biologically, who we are beyond the physical, metaphysically, if you like, and where does healing really take place? If we look at what's happening currently globally, as Sister Maureen rightly said, there's that element of what is driving the behaviour. And again, me and my naivety, it's like, well, why can't we all just get along? We're just human beings, we're just light beings, aren't we all? And a bit of lightness, but I do see that we are all multidimensional beings, that we are light beings. And I think for me, when it comes to that conversation, there is also looking at where do we come from? Did we come from the stars? Do we come from love? And then what else do we need to know about our origins if we are all simply brothers and sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles? Then why the disharmony? And then how can we get back to a thinking that we are all, as the title of the programme is, Embracing Oneness? How can we do that? And so I want to leave it with a question, really. The question is,
getting your own back on.
What else is possible? If this is where we are at in our current spiritual and human evolution, and I love to play on words a little bit, so I spell human HUEMXN. You might want to think about that a little bit. And then I think also in our conversations, one of the things I think is really important is to come back to the heart, is to remember the love, because the love is always there. And if, just play with me for a minute, if you'd like to, all of you, just remember a time when you fell or when you rose in love. When you felt an awareness that you were in love. Can you remember a time? Many of you, all of you. I know some of you have to go back a little bit further to pinpoint a time. And as we do that, there is an energy shift, isn't there? There's a vibrational shift in our heart being, in our physical being, recognizing, having that awareness that we came from something We came from an energy. We came from a source that may have some of the answers. What if the answers were within us? What if the magic is within us?
Beautiful. Yeah, well, definitely believe the magic part. That's the thing, I think, too. It's an interesting aspect with the genetics aspect. I mean, just briefly touch on that, because I started with that, and the whole scientific journey took me towards being a devout atheist. I mean, I was not agnostic, I really went for it. I think by about the age of 9, I was pretty much an atheist. But anyway, that's a long story. But then going deeply into genetics, not having a belief in any divine being, I always considered myself a humanist, in that I believed in the good and potential of people, but I didn't believe in any divine power, which was a big hole. I didn't realize at the time it was a big detriment. And at the time I was studying genetics, towards the end of the 80s, it was really in its pioneering phase, but it was gathering momentum, and the feeling was that it would be able to explain everything. There was a lot of arrogance. I mean, scientists didn't think they were arrogant, but there was that. It was getting to the stage where, if we crack this, then we'll know all the answers. And then later on, you mentioned epigenetics came along, which sort of originally they thought that basically our genetics was like a recipe that decided everything about us. And so it constructed our physical being, but also the structure of the brain, and so it would affect our personality. And there was always the acknowledgement that environmental factors would sway this, but that it was that the fundamental machine was it was sort of going under. It was genetically dictated, and then epigenetics later came along, which showed that consciousness, that state of mind, could actually start to change genetic expression, and that sort of blew the water out of the whole thing, because then it sort of made genetics subservient to consciousness. And it's a beautiful thing in a way that we see that science and spirituality are starting to converge. There was a documentary recently, gradually there are there's a lot of speed in some areas. There was a documentary recently about the heart exploration, that it's not actually a pump, it has a much bigger role in terms of the magnetic field it creates and the infrared energy it creates. And so there's all sorts of things coming out, but it's interesting, this aspect of consciousness, and I suppose the question about where we come from, what's the essence of who we are. I think you asked that as well. I want to go back to Sister Maureen with this. There's a couple of things that have come out of what you've both been saying, or more than a couple, but one is, I guess, how do we balance, because, as you said, there's so much stuff from the past that is affecting us now. Not just familial, but ancestrally as well, culturally, societally, globally. And as you said, we have to understand it and face it to some extent. There is a balancing line between how much you go into the past, where it starts to eventually, it can become detrimental to look into it too much. So I think that was one question. And I'm going to ask the other one because I don't want to forget it. I can deal with it one by one. Time is flying as well. But the other one is, how can we start to heal from, if it is detrimental to go into the past too much, and it can be because it can open up more and more cobwebs. What does spirituality teach us as an alternative for healing that we can focus on, rather than continually going back to the past and sort of reopening old wounds?
I like to think about it as, understanding the principles at work. And sometimes there are specific things to go into, but more if I understand the principle that, the things I've accrued are actually to do with a particular identity that I've assumed. And, the big spiritual work, I feel, is to really go above the cultural conditioning that we all have, so that we can really connect with each other as beings, as Ella said, and of course connect with the divine. And I think this is first, I think it's important, if you're going to look at things in the past, to do so from a position of strength rather than a position of weakness. And so to be able to go into my understanding my spiritual identity deeply, that we're not the physical that we see. If we just look at, think about the physical body, then, we see the culture, we see the background, we see all those labels, if you like. But actually, we didn't come with any labels, as you said. So the pure spirit, the soul, the being, actually is whole in itself. So our original state is peace, is love, is purity, is joy, is wisdom. Now imagine that's our original state. And then look where humanity's gone to and how much we've forgotten that original state. So I think the first thing is to really emerge that and really make that very strong. And then I can look with a different perspective at the past, so I can put it into perspective. Otherwise it can overwhelm me. So I think that's the first thing, spiritually, to really to do that. And in terms of healing, quite honestly, what can really heal us is God's love. I have to say, yes, working things through. And I have to say, of course, sometimes there are traumas from the past that are very strong, and there may be professional help needed to really work that through. Of course, we're all different. We've all absorbed things in different ways. But in general, when it comes to it, ultimately, can these processes then prepare me for that ultimate possibility of healing, which is to absorb God's love? Because God's love is empowering, it's healing, it's a love that, because it's so unconditional, so pure, it actually can lift me, or in a way wash away or lift me from negativity in a way that human love can't. Human love, there are many people who show love in a very altruistic way, and it is healing. But God's love is another level above that, or beyond that, if you like. So I think that these are the spiritual practices that can really help us. And then to look at the factors around us, so that we understand ourselves better, so that we understand why we have certain reactions. We can then, as I say, put it in perspective and then consciously choose, because otherwise those emotional wounds just drive us against our conscious choice. But if we're spiritually empowered, we can then say, hold on, I want to live differently. And that's very empowering.
Thank you. And Ella, do you want to add to that?
Would you like to repeat the question?
I would like to.
No, seriously. I think for me, there's this recognition that I'm in the body I'm in at this time. I'm the gender I am at this time. I have a long ancestral lineage of African spirituality. I have the conditioning, if you like, of the religion of my childhood. And I've been navigating that for a number of years, delving into Buddhism, Hinduism, And arriving back at one source, I think we can all agree that amongst all the religions, the one thing that brings us all together is this idea of love. And speaking of this idea of love and healing and being in the country that I live in now, the country I was born in, I happened to be here because the mother country sent out a request to the Commonwealth, which my parents answered, that there was a desire to rebuild England and Britain at the time after the Second World War. And so this invitation was heeded by many, many people from around the world who are part of the Commonwealth now. And so for me, healing encapsulates a lot of that journey, not just for my parents, but for their parents as well, the opportunities that perhaps were envisaged in this country, and of course the opportunities that they left behind. Some of you may or may not have heard about this little hurricane called Beryl that moved across the Caribbean a few weeks ago, and in fact completely decimated the island, the beautiful island that my parents left behind. And I have memories of having visited and seen beautiful beaches, one named, in fact, Paradise Beach, which now looks like not a paradise. And so coming back to healing, I think it's interwoven, as I said before, all of life, is interrelated. And so we're weaving through the devastation, if you like, we're weaving through the opportunities, and we're weaving through the infinite of what is possible in our lives, personally, and of course, collectively. So for me personally, it's navigating that healing journey, which I think on some levels we think healing has an end point. However, where there is continual challenges coming up, whether they be ancestral, whether they be personal, whether they be cultural, religious, it becomes, for me, a daily practice almost. And I think that's one of the things that spirituality really speaks to. And for me, which started this journey, in fact, while I'm here, sitting on this stage, has been the power of the breath and meditation. And I might be going on a little bit too much, but I think it's really important to not only have that connection with the divine. I'm pointing upwards, but of course I mean energetically, vibrationally, to have a connection with a source, a higher power, if you like, with your intuitive self, with your higher self, whichever space you may come from in terms of spirituality. Healing also happens, if you like, on the mat. If you practice yoga, healing happens while you're perhaps getting the washing done or cleaning the floor. There's a space that happens when we go out of our mind. And I recommend going out of your mind at least once a day. Twice if you don't have time. And for at least 10 to 15 minutes. And in fact, one of the things that I love to do is I set people a challenge, if they haven't meditated before, to spend at least half an hour on their first try. And that usually turns into more like 45 minutes, an hour, and they do not realise where the time went. And in that process, you may or may not be aware of being in that space or being out of that space. But there's something that drops in. I think Sister Maureen spoke before about how healing takes place, and sometimes we're not even aware. We may just notice a few days later that a new idea comes into our mind, that there's a little piece of creativity. In fact, in the lockdown, I started painting. I know. But for me, it's also an act of rebellion in a way, to tap into that creativity, particularly in times of upheaval, in times of struggle, in times of challenge. Why are we here? If we're here to be creative, if we're here to share our gifts with the world, what are those gifts? And let that be the act of rebellion. Let that be your healing, where you're sharing who you truly are with the world.
Thank you.
I just want to comment there. I loved what you said, that healing continues. It doesn't have an end point. And I think that's so important because, we're going through many things in life, and that to me brings that concept of humility and learning. We're constantly learning.
Yeah.
And if on the spiritual journey you ever think you've arrived somewhere, you're just deceiving yourself completely.
Exactly.
You get a big shock soon enough. Yeah. Thank you to both of you for that. I mean, the time's gone so quickly. Such a big topic. I know that we have the workshops both for online and in person later on, where we can explore these ideas more. But I just wanted to. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Is that right, Masana? And there's a mic coming around. So if you just raise your hand, I think this gentleman already. Hi.
My name is Dinesh. I'm into education sector. Having seen you here, all big people and well qualified, and the fusion of science and the spirituality, it is quite a rare combination. My simple question would be directed not towards anybody individually, but in general. Can spirituality be achieved, or the journey path can be reduced to an extent by taking help of the genetical view or the genetics? Can there be a mutation in the genetics to suit the requirements of the spirituality route, so that a person like me, who is always driven to spirituality, keep on trying it the best possible, but I'm not able to reach there. Even I cannot meditate. Once I deeply meditate, something will come, commercial angle will keep coming, some disturbances will come, I'm not able to achieve it. I really want to see that, and can the science be there? Is there any research on that?
Because you want to put a chip in?
The chip AI. When I was talking on the AI, the chip can be created, and they are creating chips now.
Yeah.
So, is there something is going on? Because the day before I was on the scientific meet on the AI, and they were talking about the chip, and they said that something not on that.
Do you want to
for something else?
Do you follow Elon Musk on? Maybe you should connect with him. I'm not sure I can answer that.
My simple thing: is there anything that spiritual? I mean, this human behavior and all other things can be changed by the proper mutation, and the genetic route, so that
I think
the spirituality route can be achieved.
Thank you for the question. I think I'll maybe deal with the genetics part and then hand over to the spiritual part. Experience teaches us that if you try and solve anything from the outside in, and that's anything physical, whether it's drugs or, to change my awareness, or they can have beneficial use to treat conditions. But if I try and use them to reach enlightenment, then eventually, anything outside in causes problems, whether it's addiction or I have to change from the inside out. And genes are subservient to our whole biochemistry, genetics, even at the most subtle level, is still subservient to consciousness. I can't change my consciousness permanently and in a healthy way by forcing it through a physical avenue, no matter how subtle or technically advanced it is. It will end in disaster at one point or another. That's my understanding of practicing both. So, but I'm going to hand over to, so the short answer is no. There's a lot of research happening, but I don't believe it will ever, it will never lead to fruition that creates lasting benefit. That's my opinion. Sister Maureen, do you have a take on this?
I mean, I agree with what you say. So, I mean, just briefly that, you know, we are conscious beings, we are spiritual beings, and we've had an existence before this body came into existence. We have an existence after this body finishes. And so if I get enlightenment through something physical, then my enlightenment's won't go with me. So really, we're the master, it's coming into that spiritual identity. And maybe come here and learn more about meditation, and then, or wherever you need to go, then that will help you. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I think for me, there's a process there of unlearning. I have the ability to really sense where you were coming from with that question. And oftentimes when I speak to many people who are leaders in their own right or in businesses and executive level careers, that there's a concept we talk about, which is a journey from the head to the heart. And it's quite a short distance, but quite a long journey. And so I think within that context is spirituality, which is, I consider it more of a journey as opposed to the destination. And the invitation is to come to Raja Yoga and allow the intellect to journey through to the heart.
Maureen, you mentioned your background of refugees, being your parents were refugees and grandparents, as were mine. And I wonder how much of, and speaking of ancestral, what was the phrase? Suffering. Ancestral trauma?
Yeah.
Yeah. Suffering, or intergenerational trauma. How much of that trauma was passed from grandparents to parents, then from if parents hadn't dealt with it, to us? And so how much, and you were talking about how many of the cobwebs do we want to open up, and I just wonder how deep is some of that stuff buried? Yeah, and and it is physically passed on in some way.
I mean, everybody has an individual journey, so it's not going to be the same for everyone. And I think we all take it in different ways as well. But certainly it can be, the thing is that it's unconscious most of the time. And so you don't know what is driving you unconsciously or subconsciously. And so that's where, again, just coming back to the spiritual endeavour and the spiritual awakening that helps us to put that in perspective, but also sense what those things are, and then saying, okay, if this is not mine, let me step away. But of course, it's not just sounds so easy. Just step away, that's it. It's not quite that easy, but at least you can see the path and you understand. For me, if I understand what's happening, I can deal with it and I can transform it. And of course, I can take God's help for that. But it is very individual, I have to say. Yeah. What's that?
I think for me, it's a matter of perhaps unlearning. I think that's been part of my spiritual journey, unlearning some of the lessons, some of the traumas, big T, small t traumas, ancestrally in this lifetime. And also, acceptance that I may not understand where that has come from. However, my role is to heal, and we're only going to get to the destination, if you like, of peace if we do that internal work ourselves. And I kind of refer you back to what I was saying about your own creativity. What are your gifts? What are you here to share? And using that as your roadmap, if you like, because sometimes these challenges can be a roadblock as you try to understand, because even if you find out the reasons why someone did whatever they did 300-400 years ago, what difference would that make to your life now? What if you never understood? And I think for me, it speaks to who are you, who you truly are. What is your identity now? Who is it you want to be? What is it you want to share? And what is the impact that you choose to make in your own sphere of influence? Because we all have that. We all impact other people on a vibrational level. So you'll know what needs to be healed, because often someone will tell you.
Hello, hi. So this is a question specifically for Sister Maureen, and as well as the floor as well. You talked about healing and how it can be done through meditation or connection to the divine. Can you please expand a bit more on that, purely on the basis that, from my experience, it does help, but I just want to know, is there any specific type of meditation, or is it just constant connection to the divine on a daily basis?
I think it's important to recognize, and Ella used this term, that God, or that Supreme Being, is a source, and is a source of everything that we need, actually. Source of love, source of peace, source of truth, source of happiness. And so whatever needs healing, I can go to that source and connect and be able to absorb that into myself so that it heals the wounds. It's a bit like, if you have a bowl with dirty water, you keep flushing it out, and you get to the clean water. Bit of a gross example, but so along with that, taking strength. And so that strength enables you to then face whatever is coming towards you. But the connection has to be, you have to get onto the wavelength to connect. Mm-hmm. So first, we were talking about the spiritual being, first being aware of my spiritual identity. I'm a soul, a being of light. And the body is my costume, but it's not me. I'm actually a spiritual being. I inhabit this costume, and I work through the costume, and I, through my senses, but I'm a being of light. In fact, we say that in the center of the forehead is where the soul resides. And then when you are in that consciousness of who you are as a spiritual being, you're on the right frequency to be able to connect with the divine. And then it's not difficult, but you have to have that first step. But also it's important to make it a daily practice, to set aside time to develop that connection, and then you'll find that you can go back to it whenever there's a need. Does that help? Thanks.
So I think we're... you have an online question?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Hello, everyone. So, so the next question is, both speakers talked about individual journeys. Is there also collective journeys of healing that are necessary? How are they the same or different? Thank you.
Hello?
This is sort of related, and just to speak briefly to the question you asked, is this, that no one is coming to save you. You have to save yourself. And then to speak to the online question, is specifically this, that we have to do our own inner work, do our own healing. And as I mentioned before, that then impacts vibrationally our own sphere of influence, because collectively we can heal. However, if we're constantly unlearning the injustices of the past, if we're constantly unlearning the misinformation we've been fed, we do not create that time for ourselves to have that higher vibrational connection, then there will be a misalignment in terms of the collective healing, which is why it's important that we all do our own inner work. And one of the things I advocate is that we heal ourselves so that we can be part of the collective healing.
Yeah, thank you. So this aspect of personal responsibility, and then it benefits the collective. And Sister Maureen, do you want to?
No, I agree, because whatever's going on inside of us, it's like, it's not hidden, we may try to hide it, but it's not hidden. And so our thoughts and feelings create vibrations, and that affects the atmosphere. So it is a collective and personal and collective responsibility. And once you come in here, you feel the atmosphere, because people are here wanting to uplift the atmosphere. And so it's a very important service for our community and for the world. Yes, definitely. Thank you.
And good company is very important, right? And the collective power of meditating together. I mean, like everybody who's taken the time to come here today or join online, it's when we make that commitment to, you're making a commitment to your own inner progress, but it creates a collective vibration that actually goes outwards, and it has an impact on the world. And actually, just very briefly, I know we have to finish now, but again, science is now backing up that we know that the brain and the heart radiate a lot of electromagnetic energy that actually the earth as a whole does, and we all contribute to that field. And now we know that, if I work on my connection with myself as a soul, my connection with the divine, I'm literally changing the frequency in the physical universe. So I'm bringing change from inside out, and then that has a global impact. So I think that's also very interesting. Fascinating topic, which we could have had another 3 hours, I'm sure, at least. As I said, we've got the workshops anyway, so we'll be able to explore a little bit more. I'd like to thank Ella today and Sister Maureen.
Thank you.
And Masana,
Thanks to Matthew.
Thank you.
Everyone.
And everyone else, yeah.